Hello everybody, welcome back. Got some games that I had played here in March 2026, this previous month. Played about, I think it was about 8 games this previous month. Also had to stop streaming because my schedule had changed on certain things and things are not going my way. I kind of wanted to continue streaming and then life got in the way. I'll figure it out. But anyway, still did play some video games, whether streaming or not streaming. Thought I'd share with you what I had played this month and my thoughts on the video games that I had played. So, let's get into it. I did stream most of the games that I did play this month. So you can go onto the live section of my channel and check out me just playing through some of these games. Some of the later games that we'll talk about I didn't stream, but let's just get into it, shall we? So the first game that I had played this month the first game. These are all games that I beat this month, and the first game that I beat this month was Super Bomberman 2. And I had actually played through Super Bomberman 2 through 5, so for full transparency, a lot of all of these games had kind of bled together in my mind when it actually came to articulating thoughts. So I do have some notes that I did write for it that I'll kind of reference here as I'm going along here. But for the Super Bomberman games in general, I had played through the recent Konami compilation that had released, where they had released all 5 Super Bomberman games as well as Bomberman's 1 and 2. I had talked about Bomberman's 1, 2, and then Super Bomberman, the first one, in my last February 2026 video. So if you want to know my thoughts on those, check out that video. Starting with Super Bomberman 2 here, this one was again developed by Produce and featured some neat stage gimmicks, had a really good soundtrack. I remember enjoying it overall, nominally. I did like the idea of, so in the first Super Bomberman, you would fight through most of the levels and then you got like this gauntlet of like NPC Bombermen that you had to fight, and I remember that being a real pain in the butt. In this game, once you complete a world, you get to the boss fight, but before you fight the boss fight, then you fight your NPC Bomberman, and I thought that was a better idea for sure, especially if you want to establish, I guess, narrative or structure or progression. I just thought that was a better idea overall. There was one boss in particular, like a lava boss, where I really had to like hope and pray to defeat it, so I don't remember enjoying that boss too much. And then a pattern that I don't remember. I think I say it in like a stream because I took notes, and part of how I took notes was I was rewatching my streams just to see what my general thoughts were. And I remember that a pattern that had started to emerge, and I think this was the same case with Super Bomberman 1, which is that this game and all of the other games are pretty much fun 80% of the way through, up until you get to like the last leg of the game. And that's when things really start to take a turn. And so I remember the last world of this game, I think it was the one where they like turn the lights off and the floor starts to crumble from under you. That sucked, and I remember that not being fun at all. So I would say, in terms of recommendations for Super Bomberman 2, I thought it was a fine game. I thought it was enjoyable up to a point, but I would definitely recommend playing this with like save states or a rewind feature or something to that effect that makes that last leg of the game all the more easier to get through, because otherwise it's going to be a little bit of a pain in the butt once you get to the end of the game. But of course, after Super Bomberman 2, we played Super Bomberman 3, which was, I think, my favorite out of the Super Bomberman games I had played when it comes to this like sub franchise. This is where you get the introduction of Bomberman's pal Louie, or I guess Rui as he's called if you kind of infer the Japanese a little bit, makes sense. He's kangaroo like, so being called Rui makes sense, but he's called Louie in English, and he's fun. Each different colored Louie comes with different abilities. So some can, I think, hop over blocks, some can just kick bombs by default. So that's a pretty fun introduction, pretty fun introduction, and pretty fun differentiation from the previous Super Bomberman games. And of course, I've played Bomberman Hero, which is probably one of my favorite Bomberman games. And so seeing kind of the origins of Louie, I thought that was really fun. Also, something interesting to point out, you've seen it on the screen already. This was not developed by Produce. This was the first Super Bomberman game in that sub franchise to be developed by Hudson Soft themselves. So I think that kind of translated into me having a little bit more fun as well. Maybe they just had a better idea of what Bomberman should feel like as a game to play in terms of like a single player experience. I will say that the art style ended up being really cutesy as well. Really like the look of this game. I did like how you had all of the stages would be all on like one screen, and what I mean by that is like each stage you would play would be on one screen, whereas in previous Super Bomberman games you would have had to like screen scroll on a couple of them, and they were a little bit long, kind of like the classic Bomberman. You would have to like kind of scroll. This was the first one that kind of stuck to that one screen method where you would just the level you would play would just be on one screen and you could see all of the information just right then and there, which I thought was pretty neat. And then again, even though this was my favorite, regardless of that, again we get uh, that that formula where the game is about fun 80% of the way through until you get to that last world. I think this one was a factory world where it's like a lot more stages this time around, and I don't remember the final Bagular fight or Bugler or whatever he's called. That guy's fight be all that fun either. But I would say if there's any Super Bomberman game you should play, you should probably make it this one. I think this one was probably the most memorable out of them all. Then we got the Super Bomberman 4, which was the first Bomberman, or well, I think this Bomberman, I'm trying to get my facts straight. This Super Bomberman was not released, at least here in the United States, or at least in the West, quote unquote, whatever the fuck you want the West to mean. Um, but it was not released in English until this recent compilation. So now we get to play it and everything, and I thought it was fine. We're going back to Produce Entertainment, who developed this game, and you get one of the interesting things about this game, one of the interesting gimmicks about this game is that you're kind of traversing through history. So you start in like prehistoric times and then you eventually get to like historic Japan. So I thought that was an interesting little through line in terms of the aesthetics. You do get more rideable pals, so you get like rideable dinos and things like that. There's also like an egg system, which kind of acts as like a lives system where if you get hit on your buddy, instead if you have eggs, and the eggs kind of follow you around in the way that like a classic Sega game like Flicky would do, where the eggs would kind of like follow you around. But if you got hit while you had these eggs and you were riding a buddy, instead of hopping off of the buddy, it would just spend an egg and you would get to continue being on your little buddy there. So I thought that was interesting. So again, a lot of more of the same. Pretty fun up until the end. More of what you can expect from the Super Bomberman series at this point. Nothing to really note there. So I think generally enjoyable, but overall more of the same. And then you get Super Bomberman 5, where we're going back to Hudson Salt, which I was actually anticipating that to be a good thing, but Super Bomberman 5 ended up being one of my least favorite entries in the sub franchise for me. And because it's the shortest one, and it seems like it's the one where it seems like Hudson Soft was really running out of ideas for this game at this point. And that's because every world in this game is fashioned after a previous entry within the Super Bomberman franchise. So World 1 in this game had levels that would appear in Super Bomberman 1. World 2 would have levels appear in Super Bomberman 2. 3 would have SB3, so on and so forth. And I thought that was just kind of, it was interesting at first. It was an interesting and novel idea at first, but again, I don't. To me, it just reads like they didn't really have much in terms of like new ideas of where they could go with this whole concept of the Super Bomberman franchise. Another thing I didn't really like was the actual structure of the game, where in Super Bomberman 5, when you clear a level, you get to have multiple different exits. And depending on what exits you took, it would kind of take you on another branching path. Kind of like a game like Kid Chameleon for another Sega game I'm thinking of, where it'd be like a different path to get to the boss. And so that, I guess, is interesting. It makes replayability a little bit more interesting in terms of what decisions you can take. But in terms of like, as I said, this is the shortest Bomberman game, and so this game ends really suddenly. And so when I went back on stream to try and complete it, and then I went and read a GameFAQs to see if you could even get anything. Turns out you don't really get anything at all in terms of 100% completing everything, completing all those different levels, and completing all the different uh, branches, because the game does allow you to go back and play certain levels, and it does keep track of that progress. But what you get for all that work is really just kind of like a new game plus, which I found to be very disappointing. So overall, I would say, in terms of the Super Bomberman, this is the one you should definitely play last or steer clear of the most, which I guess you might do anyway since it's the last one in the franchise. But I ended up being really disappointed by this one anyway. So leaving the Super Bomberman franchise on a little bit of a just a lesser feeling, which is disappointing. But after that, I played a game that I enjoy much, 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 much more. That, or well, this is, so Super Bomberman's 2 through 5, those I had played for the first time ever this past month. This is a game that I had replayed, and I've replayed a lot. That would be Turok 2 Seeds of Evil. Specifically, I had replayed the Nightdive Studios remake that released in, I should really have this information up already. 2017 is when the remake released. So the original released in 1998. The original Turok 2 released in 1998 on the Nintendo 64. Meanwhile, the Nightdive remake was in 2017. And overall, my thoughts on this one are the same thoughts I've had on Turok 2 forever, which is that I love it. I think it's great. It's one of my favorite games of all time. Love the creativity, love the actual progression, love the weapons, love the aesthetics, love the Darren Mitchell soundtrack, love almost everything about this game. It certainly has its flaws, for sure, and I'm not so nostalgia bound that I can't uh like articulate those flaws. For example, the actual narrative that they try to spin is super thin. They're building up to stuff in the third game that never actually pays off. It is super easy to get lost in some of the levels, and they do establish rules that they end up breaking throughout the game, which could end up really throwing some people off, especially in World 4, Lair of the Blind Ones. That's a particular pain point within Turok 2 that Nightdive does try to address in this remake, and I think they do a well enough job as they can, but it still doesn't alleviate the fact that that level is still a pain point here. But still, I would say if you've not played Turok 2, I would highly recommend it. It's one of my favorite first person shooters, and definitely a sign of what's to come in terms of like explorative first person shooters, especially Metroid Prime, as I believe a lot of the staff that had belonged to Iguana Entertainment, who developed the original Turok 2, would go on to be a part of the original lineup of Retro Studios, who would, of course, go on to make Metroid Prime, which is now an extremely beloved first person shooter to this day. So I would say play it for sure. It's a lot of fun. And then, of course, excuse me. And then, of course, I had played or had replayed Turok 3, specifically the remake of Turok 3, again done by Night Dive Studios. The original Turok 3 was released in the year 2000, while the remake was done in 2023, so fairly recently. Turok 3, I think, is a little bit of a dark horse in terms of the Nintendo 64 Turok games. This one is a lot more linear, though they do try and do something interesting with like you could play as two different characters, either Danielle or Joseph, and they each have their different attributes about them. For example, and Danielle is taller and gets heavier weaponry, but she can't go into like tight spaces. Meanwhile, Joseph, did I say yeah, I said Joseph. Joseph is smaller, so he gets to go in tighter spaces. He also gets like night vision goggles and a sniper rifle, but doesn't get that heavy weaponry. I'd say this game is fine overall. I don't hate Turok 3. I do think it's an interesting game, especially when you look into the history of cinematic shooters, especially with games that would go on to define the cinematic shooter, like Resident Evil 4 or Call of Duty. Especially the Modern Warfare games definitely kind of established that cinematic shooter. This is kind of an early cinematic shooter, Turok 3 is. And in that way, I find it very interesting. But as someone who's a big fan of Turok 2, I don't like this game as much as that game, for sure. I will say I did play it twice, once on stream as Danielle. I think I played as Danielle on stream. And then I found out on stream that Night Dive actually added two more playable characters. One was a raptor and one was Joshua Fireseed, who is the main character of Turok 1. So I'd actually went back and replayed as the raptor, which was interesting. It's different enough. You could play as with his little talons, which kills people pretty quickly. And then I think you get the same loadout that the raptor gets in Turok Rage Wars, which hasn't been adapted for the modern times by Night Dive yet. I don't know if they're ever going to do so, because Turok Rage Wars is a more multiplayer focused game, and I don't think Night Dive really going to do anything with online multiplayer. So if it is going to be multiplayer, probably going to be local. But the interesting thing about Turok Rage Wars, other than the fact that it is kind of like an Unreal Tournament ripoff, is that you get to play all these different characters in the single player mode, and then these different characters can have different loadouts. And so I think the Raptors loadout is actually adapted from Rage Wars, which I think is a really cool and interesting detail. So yeah, Turok 3, it's fine. Would I recommend it? I guess, but certainly get it on sale, because I think the price that it is right now on Steam, which let me just look this up real quick. Turok 3 on Steam right now is $29.99, which is definitely not worth it. I would say so. I'd say that's way too much for this game. Definitely get this on sale for a big cheap price if you can get it, because otherwise I would not recommend this for $30. Probably not even for $20, in my personal opinion. So there you go, Turok 3 Remake. So after that, I had played for the first time Yomawari Night Alone. So back in the day, back in the day, back when I did reviews on this YouTube channel, I had played a game called Yomawari Midnight Shadows. I actually did a review on it. I think it's still up. I remember enjoying that game a lot. So this past Christmas sale, I had actually bought Night Alone, Midnight Shadows, and then Lost Again, I think it's called. I think I have it. I have my games folder up here real quick. So I'd play Night Alone. I have Midnight Shadows, and then Lost in the Dark is the third one, which I haven't played. This is the very first one that... Who developed this game again? I want to say it is NIS Entertainment, right? Nippon Ichi Software. So yeah, NIS Entertainment developed all three. This is the first one. And as such, the actual infrastructure of the game is a little iffy when you're playing it on the PC. So a little bit of a fair warning, you might need to do some finagling to play it on controller. But I thought it was fine. It's kind of your I had a little bit of a voice crack there. I thought it was fine. Um I thought but yeah, I thought this was fine. The horror aspects I still really love. Really love the aesthetics, really love the creativity, really love kind of going through it, and as well as the more explorative aspects where you're finding like pieces to a puzzle or different other items that give this world a little bit more flavor. In terms of the actual criticisms I had for Night Alone, there were some progress steps for me that felt a little bit nonsensical, and there was some certain like enemy encounters when it came to like I remember one of them would be like a dog, and the dog would just catch up to you automatically, and the game doesn't tell you that you have to like throw a rock to distract it. You kind of have to like somehow intuit that. So that to me kind of rubbed me the wrong way. So there were definitely points where I felt like I needed like a guide to continue with this one. But I would still recommend it overall. Very cute, very I would say scary for sure. Not like so scary that it haunted me in any way, but scary enough to where if you're looking for a really cool like Halloween type game, or if you really like horror games and you haven't checked out any of the Yomawari games, whether it be this one or not this one or Midnight Shadows, I'm gonna guess Lost in the Dark is gonna be the same way. I'll probably talk about that next month. I'll get to it at some point. Um, but yeah, what I'm trying to say is that I would highly recommend this game. I think it's definitely worth even the kind of esoteric progress that you need to make. Still worth it in my opinion. Pretty fun game in my opinion, especially if you like adventure games or horror games. This is a game for you, I think. And then finally, I ended this month off on beating the new Resident Evil Requiem, Resident Evil 9, as is sometimes known as. Very, very anticipated game for a lot of people this year. I was a little wary going into this myself, as just for full transparency, I think most people like Resident Evil 8. I like it too, though I don't know if I like it as much as other people like it. I think it's a very good game, Resident Evil Village is. And I might even talk about it next month because I kind of actually want to replay it. I think it's fine in terms of it feels like a modern adaptation of the Resident Evil 4 style. But it's very messy when it comes to the actual elements within, and it feels unfocused somewhat at certain points as well. It feels like what it feels like Resident Evil Village. I'm sorry, I'm talking about Village more than I am Requiem, but I feel like it is important to talk about Village a little bit to get into my thoughts of Requiem. But Village felt like Capcom trying to put multiple different elements of Resident Evil games past into one game. And I felt like it didn't quite work there, or they felt like there was some growing pains that needed to kind of take place. And I feel like Requiem definitely follows in those footsteps, but succeeds on almost every level. I loved this game. I was actually surprised because I initially started this game, and if you don't know the gimmick of this game, it kind of takes place in two different perspectives. One is kind of a more first person horror perspective, kind of like Resident Evil 7 or Resident Evil 1, where you're playing as Grace and you're going through this kind of like Metroidvania-esque level of the clinic, where you're just kind of going through this horror survival horror type gameplay. You're collecting limited resources, you're trying to survive, you feel very weak, you feel very kind of on edge for a lot of the gameplay. And then interspersed between that is Leon's gameplay, which is more action oriented. And then I did not know this. I guess spoilers, 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 spoilers. So click off the video now, because this is the last game I'm talking about for this video. But spoilers, later on you actually play the Resident Evil 4 gameplay, Leon. So the first half of the game you just play as like Grace, and that's like a bulk of the gameplay. And then the second bulk, which I did not know, it was more Resident Evil 4 gameplay, and you play as Leon, and you go through like ruined Raccoon City, and you play more of that kind of thing instead. Um, so the whole getting back to what I was saying, when I started this game and it was just bulk of Grace with a little bit of Leon, I was not looking forward to the game being like that, especially since I did not see the Leon parts paying off. But as the game went on, I thought that these elements actually that what rather what Capcom was trying to do, where they were transitioning from this horror gameplay to this more action oriented gameplay, it actually ended up working really well and created quite a unique progressive experience for the Resident Evil franchise that I thought was really interesting. Normally, what Resident Evil will do is it'll stick to, like, say, that survival horror aspect and you'll feel really weak. And then as you go forward, it'll continue to keep that mood and keep that perspective, but give you stronger weapons so that the game feels less horrifying. Here it feels like the game is being a lot more um what's the word I'm looking for? A lot more uh deliberate and a lot more explicit was the word I'm looking for. A lot more explicit with, like, this section here is the section where you're supposed to feel weak and scared, and then this section here you're not supposed to feel scared and you're actually supposed to feel very powerful and action oriented. And I think it went off really, really, really well. I really ended up just enjoying that and enjoying the actual just the experience of going through this game in general. Even the story, which I think is a little nonsensical. Most Resident Evils are, to in my opinion, none of the Resident Evils are like really like stories to like write home about or write like a Hollywood movie script about. Really, at least the source material, it's more kind of the gameplay. You have the gameplay, which is what you're there for, and the story is more like what you're on for the ride. And the story, though, I felt like was pretty well done. They never went too crazy with it, though there are parts where they might lose you. And it still seems like Capcom is trying to build up to this overarching narrative that they've been building up to ever since Resident Evil 7, really. They're still kind of in this new arc, new story era. And unfortunately, you still don't get the payoff of that in this game, which is a little bit of a shame because I do think, like, Requiem to me feels like the end of this current era that Capcom has been on, this run ever since their return from Resident Evil 7, because you've had 7, then 2 remake, then I want to say I think 3 remake came out after that, then Village, then 4 remake, then this feels like the culmination of everything they've been doing ever since 7. And it's going to be interesting to see where Capcom goes from here, because it feels like we're kind of transitioning into a new era. At least for me it does. But we'll see how it goes. But I don't want to talk about future games. That's in the future. Who cares? This game I think is great. I think it's worth your time. I think it's worth the experience, and I think that the anticipation is definitely worth it. It paid off for me, which I'm so happy about. So I would say that, like, if I were to pick a favorite game that I played this month, it would be this one. I am extremely happy with Requiem, and I'm so glad that it turned out so well. It definitely felt like Capcom took that Village approach of kind of taking elements of Resident Evil's past and putting into one game, and really kind of striking such an elegant balance with it, truly. So shout out to this game. Highly recommended. Highly recommend you go and play it if you were looking to for an opinion of, like, a random guy. I'm your random guy. I would say play it. As a Resident Evil fan, I think this was a lot of fun. And that's going to do it for the games I played this month. Pretty short video this time around. I think these videos are normally around 40 minutes, but gonna keep it short and sweet. So thank you everybody for watching. Thank you for everybody who did watch the streams. As I said, things are a little hectic in my personal life right now, so maybe I will get back to it. I'm gonna try and figure something out, but don't expect anything anytime soon. But for anybody who is interested, I do have other videos out, other videos kind of uh, outlining what I've played through each month. Been releasing those just at the end of each month. Also have done some live streams if you want to check those out. Got some shorts. So, normal YouTuber thing, like, comment, or subscribe. I will say that I don't intend on monetizing anything. I'm just doing this for the love of doing it. So with that out of the way, thank you everybody for watching, and I hope you have a great day.